Good morning. Welcome to this episode of Living the Shift podcast and actually live stream also. This is Angela Coulter and Culture. That's good. Angela Coulter, Consciousness Transformation Ascension Guide, originator of Trinity Energy Progression. And today we're going to talk about guidance. I had a client the other day. There's so many facets to this. And I was like, wow, we could talk hours on this topic alone. But it started where I had a client the other day, and in the discussion we had, she's had quite an advanced pace of awakening and coming to her, guidance on her higher purpose and all that kind of stuff. And she asked me, where does my guidance come from? And I said, well, what do you mean? Like in what context? and she said, well, I don't see guides. I don't see, people. I don't see angels and, different kinds of beings. I just, I get guidance, but where does it come from? And I said, well, is that really the question? Or is it really like, what is the guidance? Right? We talked about where it comes from. So I can talk about this really briefly. Hey, Del, cool to see ya. Thanks for everybody who's joining. So I said, okay, so ultimately, if you want to skip through about 500 levels of, filtration, understanding, and steps along the way, we get to guidance, and it's like, well, guidance is really us, our own self, right? No matter how it's presented to us, it's the higher consciousness. You want to call it divine consciousness. Some people call it God. Some people call it, source. And my understanding and the way I work is that it all comes from, we all come from this one collective whole consciousness, and that we have access to all of the information, all of the knowledge, all of the presence and creation from the creative void as that consciousness, as a piece of facet of that consciousness. So everything within this multiverse, as I understand it, is just another facet of the same consciousness. So it doesn't matter how we see or get our guidance. It doesn't matter like if you get it from an eagle or an angel or an ascended master or just a knowing, right? It's funny. If I come to think of it, I had two conversations about that this week. So when I went into meditation this morning, I was like, well, what am I talking about today? And this came in, I was like, oh, I didn't even really think about it. It has been an ongoing discussion, because what happens is this: as we commit ourselves to being beyond ego, to being, coming from the higher consciousness, and we do self-practicing and self-energy work and clearing the path of that remembrance, we start to become more and more clear as to like the bigger picture. Ooh, I forgot to turn off my ringer. Sorry about that. So it just becomes clearer. And so a friend of mine I was talking to also earlier this week said to me, so I've been having all this stuff going on, all these, like I hear these voices that I've never heard before. She goes, and it's all loving, it's all supportive. And she said, but I've also noticed that my guidance has changed. And I said, well, in what way? And she said, well, it's very, I just know. I know what to do. I know what's next. I know what to do. I know what's going on. And I said, right, well, that's like really advanced, like jumping beyond the needing the intermediary message for you to know. It's just you tapping into that remembrance to see the bigger picture, and you just know it. So it's a really challenging thing, because we put so much in the lessons of the ego, which are great. And I never put the ego down. It's been like a pivotal part of this whole multiverse of duality and separation and exploration in that, right? And exploring identity and separation and exclusion. But when it's time for us to see things from the bigger picture without those filters, because that's where the filters come from, the more we can tap into that clear guidance of knowing and remembering, the more complete the guidance becomes. So what happens is, and this is it's really challenging to talk about in words, okay? There's a whole domino effect of how we get there, right? I sort of, pushed myself into it from my higher consciousness, as many of us have, where we came into this life like committing to ourselves at a higher level that we would be able to hear it and whatever. And we have many times thought of it as a curse, or then that's all the ego, right? Or, and that was special, that makes me special and all that kind of stuff. Well, the thing is, and I was told, it's not a matter of nobody is special. It's that we're all special, right? It's that we're all divine. And so we all are facets that embody specific energies, specific messages, specific representations of this duality that we've created in this multiverse. And so every time we put something into words, it's through the filter of an ego, of an identity. Okay. And it starts to lose its purity, no matter how pure the intention is. Even as I see things and understand them, the more I put words to it, the more challenging it can be to keep the purity of the message, because as soon as we put words to it, it then falls into the filtration of my background, right? Of my background, my educational background, my command of language, how I use words, my reference points of comparison. And that's the same for everybody. So what I focus on and what I teach, and that's what Trinity Energy Progression is about, is going beyond the need for external messaging, right? To get beyond needing to go to a psychic to tell me what I already know, right? To going to an astrologer to read my chart. And all those are great tools. And I always say tools are great, because tools we have created here are reminders for us to help, like, sort of nudge our remembrance. The challenge is what's happened is we've gotten so far into separation is that we've externalized all of it. We externalized God, we've externalized the divine consciousness, or however you want to call it, or source, or like eternal knowledge. And we have created ourselves, or in our minds, incarnate, this part of our consciousness has convinced ourselves that we are in lack, right? And so therefore we couldn't know it all. We couldn't have all the answers. Somebody else has more answers than I do. Somebody's smarter than I am. Somebody's prettier or more intuitive or dumber, right? It's the other thing, dumber or not, or I'm more special or they're more special. And we've created this entire existence around that. So it's really, really embedded for us to want to get the answers from outside of us and to say, well, I went to the psychic who told me this. I went to this channeling session and this is what I got. And so I always tell people that they're helpful, except what happens is, as I said, every message that comes in via words gets filtered through the ego of the individual, filtering, bringing in the message, right? So even as pure as it can be, if you listen to the energy of it versus the words, it becomes much more of a pure understanding and channeling. So all of those things are simply reflections of what we already have access to within us. It's that we are so out of practice and we've externalized and pushed our consciousness to outside, that we look to things to tell us what they are, right? To tell us what things are. And that includes things like, the Bible, the Torah, the Quran, all that kind of stuff. Holy books, what we call holy books, and seers and all kind of all things like that. So the first inkling, so we're having this mass awakening. We've been having this mass awakening for a couple of decades now. And the first thing, because of habit and historical practice, what we do is we say things like, oh, the seer that's their special thing, right? That's that, so they can see better than I can. You can do things, and I've had so many people say to me over the years I've been doing this, oh, well, you can see things so much better than I can. You understand it so much better than I do. And it's really, it's just how easy it comes to me right now. And part of that ease has to do with my practice and how I commit myself to being a clear and open channel of that understanding and remembrance and all that kind of stuff. And the practice that, I do in energy work and psychic work, however you want to call it, is stepping out of separation with somebody and back into the oneness with them. And from there, we create where they want to be, or what they would like to create from there. And that shifts away anything that they've been trying to create from here that negates that, right? So that's how it sort of works. And all I'm doing, and what I tell people, so here's the thing: nobody's a healer except for us. That's not true. Everybody's a healer. We're all healers of ourselves. And that's all we really do. What I do is I help somebody facilitate their healing by helping them access frequencies and remembrance that they don't yet have, allow themselves access to. And then my goal is to help them access that within themselves and really push that. So there's so many different levels and so many different ways we can talk about this and the guidance thing. But part of what was important for me to talk about that I was getting is that it's time for us to stop externalizing the need for guidance to come from outside of us, right? So everything's, if we say as above, so below. I also say as within, so without. But the key is, number one, here's another, so I'm going to do another plug for unconditional self-love, for the focus for us to be coming back to a place of unconditional self-love. And knowing that we are divine, we are perfect, we have all the answers, we know, and we can do anything. It's just a matter of allowing ourselves the remembrance of getting back to that place. And the practice of habituating ourselves and supporting ourselves in that coming back to self-love and recognizing that within ourselves helps us then to actually start seeing equality around us. Because we see everybody as the divine and also all as facets of me. Right? And I honor all of their journeys. And then I also come to the place of knowing that if guidance comes to me and it's just a knowing, and sometimes I say I hear this, but I've changed later to say I understand this, because I don't really hear it. I translate it when I understand it, right? In my mind, the mind starts to try to put words to it. But the pure knowing is beyond words, right? And the more that we can focus on that nourishment within ourselves, because if we don't have that self-worth and self-love, we will block our full access to that inner guidance. If the ego takes, if we allow the ego to continue to manage that and take power over it, we'll, we will make our decisions based in separation and exclusion and judgment, right? Higher guidance is beyond judgment. So that's another thing, because people always ask about discerning. How do I discern? I'm like, well, if there's fear, anger, resentment, any kind of triggering emotion connected to it, it's from the ego. If it's just a clear knowing, that's higher consciousness. I mean, how many times, I give this example all the time. One time I was driving the car down the highway. So it's something very 3D. So I'm driving the car down the highway, and there's a truck in front of me that had construction stuff on the back of it. It was open and it wasn't tied down. And I wasn't even really thinking much about it. It was, it was the next car in front of me. There's maybe a car and a half space between us, maybe two. And I'm driving along, and all of a sudden I just knew to change lanes. And I used to say that I heard a voice that said, just move over to the next lane. That's how I translated it. It was just, I knew to move over. I moved over, and within 2 minutes, something comes flying off the back of the truck. And luckily I wasn't there for it to hit me and freak me out, and, could have caused an accident, all kind of stuff. So how many times have we known that? And then the voice of the ego, of the worry, the anxiety, but this doesn't make sense. If I do this, then this is going to happen, or this won't happen. And then we start to project. All that's ego. Anything that takes us out of the presence is ego. And so when we hear words in our head, and even words from others that are like, you should do this, you shouldn't do this, you have to do this, you can't do this, you must, you mustn't, you've got to, do this on the third full moon on your head with one eye closed. All that's ego, and it's this dependence on externalization of also of the perception of what's a better choice or worse. And that's all duality, better or worse. Choice is a choice. When we commit ourselves to seeing the higher consciousness, the bigger picture, then we simply, even if it's not something we are consciously looking at the whole thing in every moment, we're connected into it. And if we just know to do something, we just know to do it. So when I first started doing this, people would ask, well, how do you know? How do you know that's the guidance? How do you know, that was really this? And I'm just like, well, because I could feel it before I could say it. I knew it before I could say it. And the knowing, that's the pure consciousness. But our minds put so much in hierarchy and externalization. So we even talk about guidance from things like angels and archangels, ascended masters, star beings. We do channelings of those of that facet of consciousness. I'm seeing something and I can't think of the words for it. Okay, it doesn't matter. It's just all those were good examples. So we then start saying, okay, well, I'm not going to take guidance from somebody here in the 3D, right? But I will take guidance from a facet of the divine that shows itself to me as an archangel or an angel or an ascended master. And so we then are still externalizing, right? Or we will say, oh, well, I got this guidance from Mother Mary, so therefore it's legitimate. So, and that's how we quantify. Like, we still have ego attached to all this to say, so guidance from what we consider an exalted figure would be more valid than my own guidance. By just saying, I just know this is going to happen, or I just know this is how it is. So it's a challenge when you get to this place of saying, well, I recognize that I am Mother Mary, and I am Archangel Michael, and I am the Ascended Masters. I'm also the dark beings. I'm also like all of this because I'm all part of this whole divine consciousness. And so when I accept that and go beyond the facets of separation, I can see the whole picture. And that's where the pure message comes from. And there's nothing wrong with getting the messages from faces and facets, What I always suggest to people is, if you are open to getting your messages that way, let it just be that the message comes through in purity, free of ego, right? So that you understand it in the way that's high, like, I don't even like highest and best because that's even ego, in the way that's clear in the bigger picture for you, right? Because even when we tap into those levels of consciousness, as long as they have an I am kind of identity, it's also connected to an ego, even if it's not the 3D ego, right? If there's an identity attached to it, there's also a filter attached to it, which means a should or a could, or, I think this is a better way to do it than this way, or you should do it this way, or you shouldn't do it this way. And it's like, okay, so what I tell people to do when that happens, when they get that kind of message, when it comes into them that way, or it comes in through somebody else, is to step back, to get into practice of trusting your own guidance, to knowing how to listen to that knowing, to say, okay, is that my truth? Is that my truth as it's been translated to me? Many times the answer is no. Most times the answer is some of it. Some of it yes, some of it no. So that's the discernment. And so eventually it gets sort of not tiring, but like extra energy that you're putting into these extra steps, than just to accept that we can have that access ourselves. It was funny because another conversation I had yesterday. Interesting. Now that I'm talking about it, I realize how many conversations I had about this week. Someone told me who is really having a spiritual work, and she was, when she was younger, was very Catholic. And she said to me, yeah, but I had a very different understanding of Christianity. And she goes, and I don't know if it was the church I went to or the culture I was in, because it wasn't in the mainstream United States. She's like, but we were taught that, it was all coming from within us, that the God thing was all within us. And she said, in the Bible, even it was like, be still and know that I am God. She's like, but the meaning to that can easily mean that you still know that I am God. All of us have it within us. And I'm like, yeah, and the message is there interspersed, and then we, translate them. We translate and translate and translate. And it's to our ego's filter of like our, experience, our judgments of good and bad and all that kind of stuff. So as I was saying, like all this stuff, it gets more diluted. The more words we put to it, the more levels we give to it, right? And so really, as we advance in our knowing and our remembrance, what's really important is coming to this place of trusting that I can know anything, like anything that comes to me, if I practice the self-love. And the reason for the self-love that's important is if I don't believe that I'm worthy to be God, to be, or the divine consciousness, or the wholeness, or the one, the oneness, or however, everybody's got a different term for it. If I don't believe that I'm worthy of doing that or being that, then I will block myself from accessing the purity of that knowledge. And we're really in the habit of doing that. So most of the stuff that I teach, right, with the Trinity Energy Progression is about actually getting beyond those blocks. And I used to say removing them, but just getting beyond them and recognizing they're just illusion. And we can, by shifting, by doing belief work, by doing, like creation work, what I call is actually creation work now, is we can create free of those beliefs that block us from accessing that knowledge. And yes, anybody can do it, but most of us don't, because we don't realize that we have all of these walls up, which I think is so funny right now, because we have in the United States this whole issue with the wall thing that shut down our whole government. And it's like, well, anybody who's built a wall in history, like anybody looks at history, it's like the walls never work. They really don't. Because one wall precipitates needing another wall. And all that does is it continues perpetuating separation instead of collaboration. And I'm not making any judgments or anything about that. What I'm pointing out is it's a collective representation of what we're going through inside right now, of saying, am I going to accept myself as the oneness, as the wholeness, as the divine, and be able to access the self stuff myself from all different parts of the multiverse? Or am I going to continue to build walls of separation and exclusion and keep myself in lack and keep myself limited? And because we have this mass like tsunami of awakening going on, and so we have this energy of this energy of like we're all in this wave together, right? And so there's huge change going, and I'm really putting this in simple terms. There's really big change going on, and it started last year. I mean, we've had continuous change going on for like a long time now, well, even before 2012. But it's just accelerating, and that exponential, the exponential curve like has gone up. The line in the exponential curve has gone up, and so now we are really shifting on the fly. And it just benefits it. And those who are trying to hold on to those old separations, it's just falling apart. It's just imploding. And then eventually it melts away, because there's no room for that if we're all moving forward into this place of more connected consciousness. Because if we try to like keep things in separation to say, this person's more important than I am, that concept is more important than this one, this person's opinion is more important than this facet, this face of the divine is more important than mine, right? It's all the same. And so the thing is to recognize it all as divine and perfect, as well as myself, to say, I do not yet remember everything. So I allow myself to get the messages of remembrance, right? I call the messages remembrance or reminders because they are messages, but it's not something we don't already know. It's something we've forgotten or we haven't get remembered. So we get reminders, and that's sort of what we have like set up in this whole 3D existence. How to, and so things do come to us in all different kinds of ways. And so if we commit ourselves to being open for that reminder to come through, the key is if the reminder comes through, it can come through like via any facet of the divine, including any person you walk up to or cross paths with, or talk to. It could be a song in the car. It could be a billboard. It could be a license plate. I mean, I've had some of the funniest messages come through, reminders come through these ways that it's like, wow, I can't believe that just came through that way. And it's a reminder of how we create our realities, because there's me and my higher self saying, okay, so since you're not getting the message this way, or remembering this way, then let's just put it in front of ourselves over and over again. We put it in our bodies through physical pain and illness. We put it in our environments through the people who are in our realities that reflect back to us. And it's like everywhere we go. So everywhere we look, because if we create our realities as part of the illusion of the separation, then we do this whole thing of look at the beautiful rainbow of options we give ourselves to remember. And so what I tell people is in the beginning, when you're trying to listen to or not trying, when you're remembering how to listen to guidance, commit yourself to paying attention, because often if you are not fully adept at listening to it within, or not listening, but being beyond filtration and to the knowing within, which takes a lot of practice because we're just not used to doing it anymore. You just commit to the reminders, come in any way that is fun, or, like a puzzle, or, however you like to see it. And that's the way it'll come. I like that. I like that variety because I like the ability to I just like the variety, like why. And I always laugh when people say, well, I can see angels, but that's all I see. Right? And it's not like laughing at them. It's funny because it's like, or people say, well, I only believe in angels, but I don't believe in fairies, or I believe in this and I don't believe in that. And I'm like, well, they're all just different faces of the same divine consciousness, and they're all reminders, and they're all you, reminding you. So we can create it however we like, and we can create it as a dark, scary creature. We can create it as a Tinkerbell little fairy. We can create it as an angel, or an insect, or a billboard. And that's where we then can start to appreciate, and then further get into this place of unconditional self-love, to say, wow, look at the awesome things that I'm setting up for myself to remind myself. And that's when I see the messages, the thing to keep in mind is each facet, each facet of the divine in separation, everything that is presented to us in message, the thing to step in between yourself and the message, instead of just like accepting it blindly, is, okay, so what of this is really the message, right? Because then the mind tries to translate. And that's where sometimes we take a turn that might not be the easiest, right? Not that it's wrong, because there's no wrong and right. It just is. Sometimes it takes us longer to get there because of the choices that we make. And we make all of them eventually in different dimensions and timelines and all that kind of stuff anyway. So if we get to the place of saying, I could not make the wrong decision, right? And I have all the answers, and what I don't yet remember is being presented to me outside of me, and I remember and commit myself to asking, like, just that extra step of, is this my truth? Is this the message here, right? And starting to become, and what that does is it makes us, it sort of pushes us to self-dependence on that guidance. Because even asking yes or no, is this my highest, is this not my highest? Is this my truth? Is this like the message that's coming to me now? Is this the action to take? that's starting to listen to that guidance inside. And there are many ways for you to learn how to do that. There's dowsing, there's pendulums, there's tilt tests, there's, kinesiology, and then there's just simply knowing, because we know the answers. And then the more we start training ourselves to remember how to do that, the more automatic it becomes. So then what happens is eventually you don't need any of all that kind of stuff, because you just know. What some people would think were the craziest decisions I've ever made, in terms of shifting my life direction and things like that, all just came from a knowing of it's time to do this now, just do it. Or not even now, no time in there, just do it. Even if it made no sense, absolutely no sense to like the context of everything that it looked like within the picture of the 3D of my environment. So, and when we get to that place of knowing and trusting that guidance, then we don't even have to question or ask anything or anybody outside of us, because we know it's already there. So at the end of the day, the answer to the question isn't, the question isn't really, where does my guidance come from? Because, that's the simple answer. The question really is, what do I do to get to the place so that I can fully trust the knowing that I already have, and how do I commit myself to doing that and not using the tools that we create here as crutches, but simply as tools of remembrance to finally let go of them, to then get to that place within. So lots of stuff. Actually, wow, that was a lot in 32 minutes. And so thank you for joining. This is something to sort of process. And so this week, what I'm going to suggest is listen to that knowing, like pay attention inside of your consciousness, pay attention to the knowing. Hey, Patty. So pay attention to the knowing, pay attention to what you're being guided to do, pay attention to the energy behind it. Again, a very simple way of discernment of ego versus, like guidance is it coming through with anger or fear? Is it like, projecting, or this, oh, I can't do this because of this, or can't, shouldn't, must, haven't? Those are all ego-based. If you just know something, you just know it. And commit yourself to saying, okay, I'm going to see the messages around me, and then journal about them or write them down. Just write down like, oh, this is weird. I was thinking about this and this song came on the radio. Or I was thinking about this, or I was wondering about this, and then I saw this billboard. Or I saw, like, I looked up, I remember one time a person that I was working with about learning how to listen, I had told her to journal anything that just seemed a little odd or just different in her reality during it was a week between the sessions. And she comes back and she goes, well, I did actually notice something that was really interesting. She goes, I was pondering on the question, on some question within, and she goes, and I thought I knew the answer, but I wasn't sure. And she goes, I just happened to look up, and there's like everything within my line of sight was red. Like a person was wearing a red shirt. There was like a picture of red on a red billboard behind them or something like that, and a red car, all in the same area. It's almost like a red flag saying, yes, this is the answer. She goes, and about the third time that happened, I realized, oh, well, I have my answer. And that isn't sort of like the confirmation, the validation that, yeah, that's really what the answer is. So it's all of these different things. And so we're not used to looking at them that way. Mm-hmm. And that's really the key, is getting into the practice. So start with that this week. Just start looking at like the questions you're asking yourself and decisions that you're making. Are you making them out of habit because you believe you should do something, or you shouldn't do something, or you've always done something? Or are you stepping back and saying, does this serve me? Does this serve me in the bigger picture? Like, and that's a whole other discussion on a different day for habits and all that kind of stuff. So have a great week, and we'll see you next time. This is Angela Coulter signing off with this week's Living the Shift. Have a good one.